Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. Welcome and thanks a lot for registering. My name is Sunny Kodukula. I work for the Wuppertal Institute in the research unit called Mobility and International Cooperation. And I'm here today with my colleague, Shritul Shrestha. For those of you who are unaware of the Wuppertal Institute, we are a research institute and the think tank and conduct research on energy, climate change, and environment, with the main idea of bringing science close to the language of policymakers and decision makers, so that we can support them by providing the necessary tools and resources for them to implement projects on ground. This webinar is actually part of a project called Urban Pathways, and the Urban Pathways is funded by the German Federal Ministry for Environment through an initiative called the International Climate Initiative. And the Urban Pathways project is jointly implemented by the UN Habitat and the Wuppertal Institute. And we work in various cities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to develop low carbon plans in the areas of energy, mobility, and resource management. And the goal is to enable cities to align their actions and plans to support the implementation of the new urban agenda and achieving the sustainable development goals. Among our various activities in the Urban Pathways project and the other projects we do at Wuppertal Institute, capacity building is a key component. And in the Urban Pathways, we fulfill this through the initiative called Environmentalize. You are more than welcome to visit us on our webpage. You will get the links in the chat box, and also you'll see the link throughout the webinar. Please feel free to visit, and there's a lot of information there and resources for you to help you in addressing your low carbon targets. In addition to the webinars, we are also working directly with the cities in implementing actions. And one such action is provision of air quality monitoring devices to measure the impact of short and long-term interventions taken by project cities. On this topic, we have recently conducted a webinar on assembling such devices. A follow-up is going to take place in April. I mean, you can register for this webinar. You will get a link later in the course of this webinar. So in order to know who is listening and so that we can design our message better, I would like to begin by asking you some questions in form of a poll. You will see the question on your screen. There you go. And you can click an answer, an option, and then we'll show you the result. Oh, that's a nice split among the academic urban mobility planning enthusiasts and employees. And also there's a good representation of national and city level. I mean, it's also curious to have none of the above. So we'll get back to you to know more about which category you would fall under so that we can better design our questions next time. So thanks a lot for that. And we have another question. So there we have the results. Oh, that's good to see that majority of you have actively participated in a community-led event. As the title goes, this is the second part of our webinar series. So we are curious to know how many of you have taken part in the first episode of this series. Thank you so much for those who have joined in the first part. And thanks to those who are joining now. So just for those who were, since majority of you were not there in the first part, so this slide shows a brief recap of what we have discussed. In brief, from the conclusions part, we saw that tactical urbanism can be a great tool to create safer and friendlier streets and public spaces. And another thing is that people would be resistant initially to the idea of taking space away, but by increased awareness and resources and making them aware of the benefits, they can be your partners in implementation and also be future advocates. And political will has been a crucial aspect for implementing tactical urbanism, but there are also other aspects that make key changes in transforming this concept into reality. And that brings me also to the purpose of this second part, because we have seen in the last part that political will is one of the key ingredients. But then what are the other elements that make implementation of tactical urbanism possible? And that is something that we are going to discuss today in this webinar. And we'll also talk about stakeholder involvement and how planning processes work and what kind of resources are required. I mean, money is one of them, but in addition to money, what other resources are required and where can we tap into them? And we'll also see, luckily, two cities that have implemented tactical urbanism and their experiences. This webinar is actually brought to you in partnership with the World Resources Institute in India. WRI has a long-standing expertise in placemaking and creating places for people, and they have done a lot of work in India. And we have Rajiv from WRI, who is going to talk about elements that are essential for implementing tactical urbanism. And then we have my colleague, Maria Rosa, who's going to talk about an experience from Belo Horizonte in Brazil, followed by Moses Kuiyaki, who works as a transport engineer in Nairobi City County in Kenya. And he's going to share the experience while we are transferring the presentation control to Rajiv. Rajiv is our first presenter today, and he's a manager for urban development at World Resources Institute. His work focuses on people-oriented development projects and to help create better walking and living environments through a contextual approach. He currently anchors the station area plans, safe access and public space design work across different cities in India. He's an urban designer and self-taught filmmaker by profession. So I should say the mouse is yours, Rajiv.
Okay, so I'm going to basically talk about the next part of the series where, like Sunny mentioned, we initially did talk about the larger fundamentals of tactical urbanism, and for this particular series, we are going to get into a little bit of details just to understand how the whole process works, and if anybody wants to sort of adopt this in their respective cities, this could be a possible handy tool to start with. I wanted to start with something from the past before we get into the present, where if you look at certain examples across the world, for example, this example of McClung railway market, where it's a makeshift process where every time the train comes in, these markets who have the projected roof sort of convert the roof in order to allow this railway to sort of pass through it, and once it's gone, they sort of bring back the market comes back to life altogether once again within like minutes. If we talk about celebrations across the world, one such example in the Asian context, also the Chinese New Year celebrations, of how streets become alive at a given point of time, and how the streets can transform into active public spaces in the city. And lastly, talking about one of the Indian examples, this place is called Manikchowk. Chowk in India, in Hindi, means public square, where this square has a potential to be a business center in the morning, while in the evening it sort of gets transformed into a food street. So it's an active, food square. So it has this 3 or 4, avatars where it transforms itself into, and sort of explores the best of its potential possible. So if you see some of these examples, it's pretty obvious to understand that the idea of spaces, the cities have evolved over time through these kind of need-based approach, and the character of streets and public spaces in a way signify our socio-cultural and economic status. So in order to take the learning from the past, there is a, if you want the space to be created into a place, and this could be done by adopting learnings from the past and contextualizing that to the future. So there's a lot which can learn from the past and sort of adopt that, and that's where we are talking about creating new set of spaces in a temporary fashion, which could aid to something, a permanency in terms of the project. And this has to be an inclusive and people-led process. So like we discussed and like Sunny mentioned, this is something which we started in the last webinar, where we talked a little bit about and for the benefit of new viewers and new participants for the webinar. It is basically a tool which helps revive streets and public spaces and helps turn them into people-friendly spaces. And this altogether happens through a very minimal cost and a limited time. And this is what we had discussed earlier, and Sunny is already briefed about this, so I will not get into details of this. But if we come to the core aspect of the whole presentation, what we're going to talk about is, as much as we talked about the broader idea of tactical urbanism, today through these set of slides, we can understand how do we actually plan and implement tactical urbanism, if at all we are interested to take it up. So sort of a quick precursor to this, as much as I'm going to talk about different steps which are applied as a part of the process. It is also important to understand that even though tactical urbanism is a first step, we need to have this kind of long-term vision where we need to understand what are we ultimately going to achieve on ground, and this becomes the first step to that. And secondly, the components and the process listed are through our experiences on the number of projects we have done and also the research we have done, we have had. But this could of course be modified based from one context to other. So it's not like a hard and fast rule which you need to just take from it and apply, but there are a lot of modifications which are possible as a part of this process. And collaboration is key to success. So if at all you are interested in to take this forward in your cities, and so we are more than happy to sort of assist you in doing this, because we have been doing this for the last few years, and we've had our share of experiences for this. So before I get into the ingredients bit, I firstly wanted to explain, there are three key aspects we're looking at, which also we can say that we are talking about three legs of tactical urbanism in terms of how does the tactical urbanism really function. And there are three core stakeholders we're talking about, but the first two being very critical here, where it has to be a citizen-led process where the neighborhood needs to show interest in terms of doing this and achieving this. And this can't happen with the necessary government support, because since most of the public land is always owned by the government, and also there are necessary permissions required, and at the same time government is the one who is going to go forward and make this permanent, and of course and that's the reason it becomes one of the critical stakeholder to that. But we wanted to bring in the third leg here, where expert groups like us, because as much as this is an informal process which happens, it also requires certain amount of handholding, at least in the initial stage for a given neighborhood. And since we come with that kind of urban design and urban planning background, and with our share of experiences across different cities, we can share our experiences to make this project happen in a much more effective manner. And hence we believe that we can serve as a third leg to sort of balance this whole project together. So coming down to the 10 ingredients we are talking about. Excuse me, just give me a minute. Yeah, so we are talking about the 10 ingredients here. we are starting from identifying the area of intervention, then how do you eventually build a team and create proposals. Then you're talking about identifying your funding and acquiring permissions, and finally, organizing this event on ground. And I'll get into details of these stages. So when we talk about identifying an area of intervention, I mean, this is the first question which comes into your mind, that if at all I want to develop a tactical urbanism project, what is that I need to choose? You need to look at identifying streets or public spaces, or a pocket space, let's say an abandoned or underused parking spot for that matter, which has a higher probability of becoming a potential public space for that particular neighborhood. And of course, they need to have this higher level of visibilities for a very obvious reason, that it can attract as many pedestrians and public space users as possible. And something about an area which demands for a change, where there might be a lot of issues happening there, and or it might have a very high potential to become an important space of the neighborhood or a city. And finally, talking about area with active neighborhood representation and government interest, because as much as the space has its potential, it becomes very critical for people to be participative as a part of this process. And talking about a little bit about its potential as well, where it's important for us to understand that can this project create a change in terms of its activity and behavior, and can this space also sort of create an impact? It could be its immediate surroundings or the whole of neighborhood itself. An example like this, where the street width is so huge and with uneven right of way, it had this potential to sort of get converted into an active public space, as well as space for cycling and walking as well. So is there a way that we can sort of identify the true potential of these spaces before we start working on it? The next thing is, now that you have your space, the next main part becomes is about building your team. If once you identify a bunch of core members, let's say about 3 to 4 people are interested in the neighborhood to sort of take this forward, you can start identifying people who could be representatives, local groups, NGOs, institutions, or schools and colleges, any people from any kind of representation, because there is no hard and fast rule that it has to be a particular kind of person, as long as he or she can understand the whole process. And secondly, you need to identify key project anchors, so that once you have your team ready, you could split them into smaller groups, where one could focus on the spatial aspect, someone could focus on finance and communication, or it could be even organizing certain activities on ground. And this could be done by identifying the true potential of the person itself. And then you have your smaller teams created for each of these things. The second part, which, as I mentioned earlier, as much as you're going to start demonstrating this on ground in order to understand how this could impact, but it is also important to sort of very quickly have a long-term vision. An example like this, where you understand you need to create a roundabout which will ease the traffic movement, and hence I work backwards to start with a very basic marking on road, and eventually that could be upgraded with semi-permanent materials, which will be eventually made permanent. So you need to have this kind of flow of this whole process to understand what are you ultimately going to achieve on ground in terms of a permanent solution, and then you can start working backwards. The next part would be, now that your area and your team, you start developing a proposal. It's as basic as this, because you need to develop something on paper and then start understanding how you could implement that on ground. So before you get into actual design, that you need to have a sense of design program, which could evolve based on your understanding about issues and opportunities on ground. So the basic categories or basic aspects, like improving safety and security of that area through this improvement of the street or public space, or it could be developing a vibrant community space, or can you make a space which is accessible for all age groups? Or are you looking at improving the parking conditions in that area? If at all there is a haphazard parking there, can you improve that space and sort of rework on the idea of parking itself? And once you have your basic design program ready, you get into detail the spatial design and contextual activities, where you start planning for a given area. What are the elements I need to put in spatially? Let's say, for example, the benches, the streets, the cycle tracks, or the crossings. Or it could also talk about planning your kind of activities which you're talking about. It could be the street art or performances, or it could be open library. You need to start listing down those, but something which is very contextual in nature, where you need to understand what the community wants and accordingly plan these particular activities. Once you have your design ready, this sort of becomes an intermediate step before you get into tactical urbanism, where if you have time and the bandwidth, it's always good to bring the community together in the initial stage to quickly discuss your design and make them understand that these are the components you're going to put in, and this is the reason why you're doing this project, so that you get enough inputs, and that will give you some room to even revise your designs before you make it permanent, before you sort of demonstrate that on ground. So once you have your design in place, you get to the next stage of creating a very quick estimate, because the funding is another critical part of the project. So you don't have money to sort of implement this. It becomes very hard to sort of manage the whole implementation process. So even to reach to the funding stage, you can have a quick round of estimate done. And this could be a easy set of checklist to start with, where you're talking about buying materials. Let's say for furniture, it could be in terms of old carton boxes or packaging boxes, anything you want to use in a temporary fashion. Do you need to buy them or rent them? You're talking about painting, paints required to paint the floor and the space. And you're talking about logistics, that you need to transport some of the materials from somewhere else to this particular point. And also talking about food and other facilities for these volunteers, because within your team, volunteers of 10 to 15 people become very crucial in order to manage the whole thing. So you constantly need to take care of them as well. And finally, there are some other costs where you can look into the idea of communication and outreach, and also look at team expenses itself. And as much as we're talking about the estimate here, it's also important to think about the long-term funding, like I showed in my earlier slide. If at all you have the technical expertise within your team, or if you know someone, it's always good to create a very quick block estimate, that if when whatever you want to make as a permanent implementation of ground, is there a possibility to create an estimate for that as well, so that you have a broader picture that overall the project is going to cost so much for me. Once you have your estimate, that gives you a good picture in terms of how much is the funding you need to generate. That could be on the scale and size of the project, and you can take that estimate and the design forward to find relevant funding sources. In most of the cases, the best thing which works is to pull in money from the neighborhood or the ward budget. Because most of the local representatives or the local government often has this kind of annual budget which is allocated for the development of the area. So if there's any way we can sort of tap that through different means, that would be great. If not, if it's a very small project, it won't require too much of money. Is there a way you can collaborate within the community itself, where people can donate either different objects to be used as a part of furniture, or can they donate some funding for the improvement of this space? Or at a bigger scale, we are also looking at the idea of corporate social responsibility. I mean, the funds which come through this, and this often could also be used to develop spaces within these kind of IT parks or industrial zones, which may not be government in nature. So that's also a probability. Or finally, you have other funding or expert organizations like us where if at all you want to demonstrate this in an initial stage and we see the potential that the government is willing to make these projects permanent in future, we often go to the cities and sort of design and demonstrate these projects on ground. Once you have funding, you get into other critical aspect. This falls into something which is required on ground as an important necessity, where you need to acquire all the respective permissions you need in order to work on ground or even execute this project on ground from the beginning stage. The important permissions like permissions from traffic police becomes important, because when you're actually closing down the streets or the junction or the public space and painting and even installing materials, you need at least a day or two to sort of do this. And at that point of time, cooperation from the traffic police becomes very critical, because they could help us manage the traffic which is flowing there, or if there's any resistance from the locals or any kind of passerbys, they are of very great help. So it's very important to take all the necessary permission letters from the relevant agencies. And as much as we are going to work on ground to sort of design and implement this, the ultimate goal of this project also is to get buy-in from the stakeholders and also make them actually use the space in person. So it becomes very critical to reach out to as many people as possible to make sure that on that particular day when the project is launched, you have enough participation on ground for the success of the project. So it's important to at least start reaching out to people at least 3 to 4 weeks prior to the event, so that you keep them you make them aware well in advance that this is something which is going to come up, and it would be great if you can participate in this and help us build the space on this particular day. And something which can also work in your favor is about 1 to 2 weeks before the project, if at all you want to display all the finalized designs in the space you're going to implement it. People passing by through the space will get a good sense that this is something which is going to be coming up, and they are also cautioned about preparing themselves, especially if you're talking about taxi drivers and any kind of IPT or public services which are passing through that area. If we need to give them a heads up that we are going to do this, they will start accommodating themselves to an alternate space for that particular day. And we are also talking about using the social media platforms. These platforms become very, very important for us to reach out to as many people in the city possible. And it also goes to an extent of creating posters and putting them on ground. So this adds a lot of outreach possibility and get as many people possible during this particular event. When we come down to organizing the tactical urbanism event itself, there are different stages within this, where initially you need to build the space, where you identify all the possible materials, or you get something fresh to sort of create the best out of what you have in the most low cost possible. And you could eventually demarcate the areas using paints, set up your furniture, and also infuse the activities planned for that particular day. And celebrating the space primarily deals with opening up the event for that particular day, where you open up the event to the locals, and during this time you also need to have your volunteers in place. As much as they've helped you to prepare before the activity, it's also important to have enough volunteers to manage different aspects on that particular day, where it includes managing the traffic or the activities or even the logistics for that matter. And of course, be prepared for surprises. Not everything might work according to the way you plan. There might be some changes or abrupt decisions to be taken, so just be prepared for that as well. And finally, as much as we celebrate this, there are a lot of times we end up leaving a junk behind. It's important to be responsible for the space, so that you clean it up and bring it in its the most true form possible. And while you organize these events, it's also important to measure and document impacts, where you measure some of the benchmarking conditions before you do the project, and finally compare that when you organize the event. It could be in terms of pedestrian footfalls or the nature of people using the space. This also helps you to sort of strengthen the need for making this project permanent on ground. And once you have done the whole process, and this is the later phase where either your team or your team in consultation with the required government representatives or experts could take this forward, where you could revise the designs based on the inputs you have got on ground, prepare detailed drawings and BOQs, and this leads to finalizing the funding and the project tendering and implementation. And most of this is usually carried out by the government along with specific experts and consultants. But this is something which you could have in mind in order to sort of propose to the government of what happens post organizing your project. And just to conclude, we are talking about picking up a street or an open space, identify the core issue and opportunity, build a team and design the space and collect funds, and finally build, celebrate, and clean the space. Yeah. So with that, just want to conclude and also say, mention again that we're here to assist you, and at any point of time, if at all you feel that your city needs this to be done, we are more than happy to help. And I am Rajiv from organization called WRI, which is World Resource Institute. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Rajiv. It's very interesting and a lot of information there. I was making notes. So before we go to our second presenter, we again have a poll for you to engage you. So what do you think, is it easy to convene people for a cause like tactical urbanism in your city? That's a very nice response. Maybe with the right incentives, maybe we can quiz the presenters later during the question and answer round. We have another question for you, which should be up on the screen now. Yeah. So how are you planning to organize this convening of people? That's wonderful. I mean, we have people who can take assistance from expert organizations, and here in the presentation we have, in the webinar, we have colleagues from World Resource Institute, and they could be contacted if need be. And I also see that there are some people who have expertise in organizing it. Please feel free to share your contacts with us so that we can get in touch with you and tap onto your expertise and experience to support our project cities. So coming to the next presenter is my colleague from the Wuppertal Institute, Maria Rosa. Maria Rosa is an economist and urban manager, and she's been working as a research fellow at the Mobility and International Corporation since 2018. And in her role, she supports Latin American cities in the implementation of sustainable urban mobility actions. Prior to Wuppertal, she was working in sustainable urban development projects at Technical University of Berlin and with GIZ, the German Development Corporation. And before moving to Germany, Maria Rosa worked for 4 years as a research fellow at the Research Institute of the Municipality of Quito, and she regularly conducts research on a variety of topics, including the integration of transport and land use policies, and I also know that she is very interested in financing sustainable urban mobility in cities. Maria Rosa, so the mouse is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to present the case of Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and the key elements of the successful implementation of Zone 30 projects in the city, where we participated under the project Urban Pathways. And but before I go into detail into the Belo Horizonte case, I would like to show you these pictures of some examples of practical urbanism implemented in Latin America. And as you see, we have like very nice interventions with a lot of colorful results from Ciudad Emergente, which is a Chilean NGO, and ITDP in Mexico that have been implementing this type of interventions. But some people might say that, and I think Rajiv put that in a very good form. They might say that it is just paint on the floor, but it is much more than that, and what's behind it and all the organizational process before and after, it's very important. So I'm going to talk about that and in the following structure. So first I will talk about the Zone 30 process in Belo Horizonte, so not about the specific intervention where we participated, but about the whole process on how it came to be a policy in the area. Then about the selected area, the Confisco neighborhood, where in the Zone 30 was implemented, the key stakeholders that participated in that, the key elements of the successful intervention, and finally I will show you some results. So in terms of like the process in Belo Horizonte, it has not been that easy. At this point, they are in a stage where several Zone 30 projects are being implemented, but it has started in 2014 with the plan to implement a Zone 30 in the city center. But that gained or created a lot of resistance, and there was a lack of political will. So they changed their focus and they started with implementation in peripheral neighborhoods. So the first one was implemented in April 2019 around a school area, which is a key element because schools could be drivers and also could gain more support from the community. And that intervention, which was done in April 2019, already became permanent. So, and it also gained a lot of visibility that led to more neighborhoods willing to implement Zone 30 projects. So now it's a process that comes, or a demand that comes from neighborhoods themselves. So the second one was implemented in the Lagoinha neighborhood, which is a much more central space during a street art festival. So the street art group, which was organizing the event, approached the municipality to ask them to implement a Zone 30 during the street art festival, which will become permanent. And then the case which I'm going to talk about, which is the Confisco neighborhood, is also in a peripheral area of Belo Horizonte. And this happened under the Environmentalists Initiative, which Sunny already mentioned, in September, October 2019. And it was also around school areas. So we have this approach of safe routes to school there. And why safe route to schools? I already mentioned schools could be very important drivers of this kind of processes, but it's also road traffic is the leading cause of death of children aged 10 to 19 in developing countries. And also a need to reclaim public space from cars to pedestrians, to students, etc. Before I jump to the next Belo Horizonte point, these are some of the interventions that were done under the Environmentalists Initiative in Latin American cities. So there's Belo Horizonte, there's also Cuenca and Aguascalientes. So we really had some interesting interventions there. And now I'm going to go to the selected area, which is the Confisco neighborhood in Belo Horizonte. And it's, as I said, a peripheral area, low-income households, so the social cohesion there is a little bit difficult. The school that was chosen is the Anne Frank Municipal School, which is already part of several programs of the municipality. So it's already an engaged school, so it's part of the safe and integrated school programs. It's the neighborhood cohesion point. There are 1,000 students, 2 different shifts, day and night shifts. So you have students from all ages, from 5 years to 70 years old. And 90% of the trips are done by foot. So most of the people that attend to that school are from the neighborhood. And the main fact of the area, here you can see already the design that was done, and it's something that it's not so simple. It needs technical expertise. It's a school area of approximately 4,500 square meters, and the surrounding streets that were intervened were 160 meters, the K Street, and the Marcelo Guimaraes Street, approximately 50 meters. So you can see there. And what is a very important feature is also that you have a park across the street that was intervened. So the idea was also to connect the school to the park through this Zone 30 intervention. And who were the key stakeholders? Well, the first thing that I have to mention is that we had a local champion who works for the Vega Trans, and I'm happy to say that I have her here next to me. So if you have any more questions, any more specific questions, she will be happy to respond. And so she works for Vega Trans, which is the transit and transport company, a public company of the municipality. And she has been the one driving this process all along and pushing forward. And she has also connected with other departments of this transport company, but also with other departments in the municipality, such as the waste management department. And then that's the municipality, but we also had a lot of external support. So from our side, from the Wuppertal Institute, together with UN Habitat under the Urban Pathways Project. And then our local implementer was WRI Brazil. And we also had the support of UN Women, who conducted a gender audit in the area before and after, which was very important. And then the community is key, of course. So we had the support of the school, a very close relationship to them, and a lot of support. The neighbors, of course, business owners are key. A socialization process with business owners is super key, because they might be the ones with the highest resistance, that present the highest resistance. So to work with them is very important. Then we also had the support of a local NGO, which is called Nosa BH, which supported us with some of the activities implemented, the open air cinema and so on. And the volunteers that came from municipal entities, but also from universities, were very important for the activities conducted. So I'm going to go to the participatory design, which was very, very nice, very moving. They participated in the design of the Zone 30 as such, like not the lines, but the designs within. And they also, and this goes hand in hand with awareness raising. So the kids participated in that, so they were more aware about the importance of it. And they also worked on the Zone 30 signs that were hanged afterwards. Awareness raising, we had several moments where we had some awareness raising activities. So in terms of road safety, for example, are the first 2 pictures that you see up. And then also awareness raising when we hang the Zone 30 signs that were done by the children around. We hang them with themselves. And then what I think is very, very important in order to show the results, the impact, and to be able to implement it permanently is the assessments before and after. And we had several. So we had perception surveys to many people. So at the end, we had 500 people interviewed. We had a gender audit, which was the one conducted by UN Women, where we had first a survey with women on how they perceive the environment, because in Latin American cities, insecurity is one of the reasons why women do not walk or ride a bike. So we did cycling with them around the area, so that they would show us which are the dangerous areas, and walking as well. Then pedestrians and cyclists counts were also very important to see how did they change after the intervention, and also air quality and noise monitoring with the smart citizen kit that we provided. Then here's the paint and urban furniture with the voluntaries, and we also got some recycled materials from different institutions in the municipality. That was very important because it reduced the costs. Then in terms of the activities, what we planned is like a concert for children, which was focused on road safety and public space and things like that. Then the street was turned into a playground, and at night it became an open air cinema. So these were all the activities that we conducted during that week. And then I will show you, I will zoom into the different results that we had. So this is the area intervened, so you can see the before and after. This is the street that goes from the school to the park, and this is how it ended and the day of the activities. This is from the front, and this is how it actually became a public space. So the street turned into a real public space. And in terms of like the perception of the people, when they were asked if the area is safer, like if it's safer to cross the street now, 78% of the students and teachers that were asked said that yes. If the speed was reduced after the intervention, 79% said that yes. And if they would like the Zone 30 to become permanent, 78% said yes. So this is key to say that if you have the support of the community, it is much easier to implement it in a permanent way. And so just to wrap it up, the success factors, I would say, were before and after assessments. They are key to show the impact. The interinstitutional cooperation that led to reduce the costs because of the donations, because of the work that we received for the intervention. The community engagement is key. The participation of the kids and how they told their parents, that was very, very important. Local visibility is key to replicate it. So the local visibility that this type of interventions have received in Belo Horizonte have made it possible to replicate. And then also what we are working towards is sectorial integration. So what we wanted to do is integrate some waste management into it. So we used recycled materials, conducted some awareness raising in that regard, and so on. So at the end, we had a very low cost Zone 30, increased safety around the school area, increased social cohesion, reduced air and noise pollution. To finalize, if you want to have a look at the video that we have in the NUA Campus YouTube channel, please do so. I think you will find it very interesting. And that would be from my side. Thank you very much.
So now it's time for another poll. How safe are areas around schools in your city? So that's the sad fact in many of our cities, that majority of our kids are driven to school for various reasons. And safety is also one of the reasons why many people also drive kids to school. It's sad that we don't have kids walking to school in our city yet, but that can change. So we have another question. So yeah, I think a majority of us agree that cities should implement projects to increase walking and cycling, and that actually brings us to the next presenter. We have Moses Kuiyaki, who works as a transport engineer at the Nairobi City County in Kenya. He's actively involved in the Lutvili Avenue transformation, the experience that we are going to hear today. And as an engineer and transport planner, Moses oversees the public transport operations. He's in charge of improving road safety and developing active mobility options for cities in Nairobi City Council. For those of you who are not aware of the term active mobility, it refers to walking and cycling in cities, and I think it's a much more positive term than starting walking and cycling with a non-motorized transport.
I'll be presenting from concepts to reality, the case of Luthuli Avenue in Nairobi. Kenya. As you can see in those pictures, Luguri Avenue is the one that is straight on the left picture. The second picture shows after transformation how it looks like. You can see in the first picture before any interventions were done. In all the other pictures is how the streets looks now. It's vibrant. People are going there. People are walking. People are meeting there. You can see we have even installed a parklet near our hotel. We have bicycle parking spaces. This is just to show you some statistics about Nairobi. It's being the capital and headquarters of two United Nations agencies. 40% of the people do their trips on foot, another 40% on public transport, and another 14% by private vehicles. It also accounts about 50% of employment and generates almost 50% of the GDP. There is a high urbanization rate, and the current population is about 4.39 as of 2019. So the background of the Rudhuri Avenue, the tonic street for Nairobi, there was very high congestion. The business was low. In fact, the turnover of the tenants was so high that you would find tenants living in every 3 months. The air pollution, the tenants would put air fans on their doors just to keep the fumes from the vehicles away from their shops. There was a lot of noise pollution because of the matatus. The matatus are our public transport buses. We call them matatus. There was a lot of noise pollution for them, calling for passengers, hooting, and all sorts of things. I would say there was no walking space. It was very hard for somebody to move from one side of the shops to the other side of the road because the matatus were parking one after the other. So there was not, if you get into one side, you have to walk along the shops. You can't even see what is happening on the other side. The accident rates were high. There was a lot of insecurity. The road was dirty. And knowing that in Nairobi, there is because of congestion, a lot of people walk, but the space of work for walking was not there. So Rudhuri Avenue became a very good candidate for us to change and let people know that there is a better way to use the streets rather than just for vehicles. How we got there? Through our collaborators, and we held 3 urban dialogues. We were helped by an organization called Naipolitans, who are urban enthusiasts. And we discussed about the importance of public spaces, walkability, bikeability, how it improves the quality of life, and how we engage the government to really see streets as urban spaces. We then had what is called participatory mapping. We went to the streets. We talked to the users. We got feedback from them of how they want the street to be used. The problem is as is, how they want to see it changed. And it was a very important for us, because that is how we started our mapping for that street. I need to say that before we did Rudhuri, we had done another street called Mamangena, that is in Uptown. Rudhuri Avenue is in the downtown of the city, which means that if we can change in the downtown of the city, we can change the whole city and transform this. From our participatory mapping, these are what we came out with and what we used in the design of that street. The people wanted an inclusive street for all, where they would feel safe. and improve security. Initially, due to congestion of vehicles, the safety was not guaranteed. The muggers would snatch a bag from someone and just get away because there was a lot of congestion, a lot of vehicles that you wouldn't even know who has snatched your vehicle. They wanted the street decongested. They also wanted a street that is not too noisy, a place that they would feel comfortable walking without having to look left, right for vehicles and motorbikes coming from all over. They also wanted a place they can meet and talk. The other street that we had transformed had become also popular, such that you could tell somebody, let's meet at Mamagena Street. Because there's enough space, you can stop, you can, without obstructing everyone. So they also wanted something like that to be done on these streets. They also wanted a street that was beautiful and attractive, and for the people, the shop owners, they also needed something that can increase their economy, because customers will not go to that street because of the congestion and the problem. Sorry, and the problems that were associated with the streets. On how we got there, we did a design competition. We invited universities, students. We had about 50 registered teams. At first, we got 13 entries. We shortlisted 7 and got 2 master designs. One for full pedestrianization of that street, and the other one for partial pedestrianization of the street. And the guiding principles were inclusive design. It was to provide opportunities that make people of all ages and gender and be very much welcome on the street. Multifunctionality of the spaces, such that you can use it for resting, walking, meeting people, shopping. Then the residents of the streets, that we could really change it as the city is changing, and then it should show. We should not distort the character of the place, so that we know it the way we know it. We should enhance it rather than distort the character. We experimented with tactical urbanism using temporary interventions. Initially, the first day, people did not understand really what we wanted to do. We explained to them. We got a lot of resistance, especially from the public transport operators. We held meetings with them. They embraced, although not 100%, what we were doing. And the approach helped us a lot, because by the time we were finishing the tactical urbanism week, the placemaking week in 2018, we did it for 5 days. By the time we were finishing, it is now the shop owners who are coming to say that, why can't you make this one permanent? And once we knew that now we've got their support, we knew that we can go to the next step. We also used the social media very much, and especially like when you are doing the designs for bike racks. It is the users who told us what kind of bike rack they want, And with this kind of interaction, we were able to get even the feedback from the stakeholders on the ground. We formed a WhatsApp group that was for the government, the other organizations, and the users of that street, such that we could exchange ideas and move ahead with the project. Photography was key to us. Most of those pictures, even the ones you have seen there, were taken. We had camera stations there to take pictures of what was happening. Time-lapse photography that could show whatever was happening every day, 24 hours. And is what we use for the baseline to change the streets and show it is now possible to show people from where we came from to where we are. From the design competition from the students, this design you can see on your right was adopted, which was a pedestrian priority street with a bike lane, trees, and some loading zones for the vehicles to load for goods on those shops. Once this design was presented to the stakeholders, they really liked it and actually started pushing us on when are we going to implement this. One thing we needed to do was to get political support so that we do this and also get a budget of doing the works. And when we presented this to the governor of the Nairobi city, the first thing he told us was, how much does it cost? And then can it be implemented in the next 1 week? And we are like, everybody now was caught off guard. We never expected that you'd get such kind of support from him. He actually visited the place about 3 times, talked to the residents. The residents said, okay, we want this. And we were given a budget to implement it. This is how we were implementing it. This is a budget proposal that we gave to the county government, and it was approved. This is about $14,000, huh? $140. Before, when we went to the ground, I think we were a little not, since because of the governor saying that we want this thing implemented very fast. We really had a lot of challenges when we started implementing these works. First being the drainage and stormwater management, because now we were reducing the size of the road, and the water collection points, we were putting them on the walkway now. Getting this water now where we are leaving the roads to the water collection points became a very big problem. And the stormwater collection point joins the sewer system. So once we started connecting, the residents started complaining that they are getting some bad odor from those areas. So it became a really big challenge for us. There was a lot of utility company services passing all over the street, and relocating and putting them in a safer place was a big challenge because initially they were not part of the transportation, and now because we have come to implementation, they need to come in and work with us, otherwise it would delay our project. There is the visual clutter in the street was so much, as I showed you in the first picture. There is, every building has about 10 advertisements. We needed to really look at that because the street transformation needed to be from the streets and even to the buildings. The other challenge we got was what we presented to the governor was like a model of what we want to do. But a technical design was not there. So by the time we would do the technical designs and implement what the governor saw, it becomes a very big challenge for us because first of all is the capacity and the timelines. And then the other thing was how to convince the people that even for their buildings, they need to change them for the changed streets to look like a public space. One thing that came out of this project was that through engagement, we were able to change the attitude and the mindset of both the stakeholders and the government. Because initially, I remember when we presented the first design for the street, the first objection was from the government, and they actually want us, where are the cars going to go? Where is the parking money going to come from? But through engagement, we were able to change the attitude, their mindset. And by the time we came to implement the project, everybody in the county government, from the ministers and everybody, was coming to see the transformation on a daily basis. It brought in a lot of media coverage, which also helped us in changing these people's mindset and acceptability of the project from the stakeholders. There was a lot of capacity building, especially on the government officers, because the other organizations that we were dealing with had the expertise of how the process of changing the street, and they took us through, which by the end of the project cycle, I would say that we were able to see how the process that we need to go through so that we can change other streets. And then because of the engagement with the stakeholders on that street, they were able to build trust on us, and they trusted that we would deliver what we had told them, and even now they are very happy of it. For the lessons learned, maybe because of the way that we implemented the project, there were some, you would find some of the materials brought to site were not the right quality. The technical drawings are not up to what was required. You have to keep changing them on a daily basis. People are working 24 hours. So we have to keep technical officers on the ground every day and night during the construction process. So when you want to implement, especially when you have presented the model, because that's what people want to see, the technical people must produce the technical drawings to align to the model well before you go to the ground. Otherwise, it becomes very hard once people have gone to the ground and the stakeholders have a lot of expectation to meet. We also learned that engagement with the stakeholders was key. And this, as I said before, was, first of all, we were able to change their minds. We were able to gain their trust. So as much as you give them the statistics of how how their air is bad, air quality is bad, how the noise is bad, you also need to engage them and explain to them. We also had a lot of, okay, not a lot, but we had resistance from some groups, especially the public transport operators. Engaging them, the good thing that we were able to gain their support is that because the governor came in, talked to them, promised that he'll get them some other places where they can pick their passengers, and they agreed to the project. Otherwise, you need to map up your stakeholders. I know how you're going to deal with each stakeholder because their interests may be different. Also, when you start the concept, you need to work with the government in every step, the business community in every step, such that by the time you are coming to implementation, you have ironed out almost everything. And once you get the goodwill of the people, the project is good. One thing I want to say is that when we started implementing this project, we let the community own the project to a point that they were the ones, some would come with trees, would let them plant them, get them on social media, get them on, acknowledge their contribution, and we would feel very happy for that. I remember we had some vandalism that was done. The community, because they own the project, they had to go and look for the person who did the vandalism and came to us and told, this is the person who is vandalizing the street furniture. And with that ownership, it was very good to sustain the project. And because it increased their business, we have even now requests from other streets whether we could do the same of what they saw on the solution. This is most of what I've explained about the working together of the model and the technical drawings.
Moses, I think we need to wrap up soon. The time is running out.
I just have about 2 slides to go. For the successes, we have the innovative and diversified communication strategy. That is something that we learned from our communication. We know that most our support for the project came from that. The public engagement of the community was a big success for us. Tactical urbanism. As I said before we started, people were a bit hesitant and resistant. By the time we were leaving, they were asking us to make it permanent. So we were able to distamp the order of that street, people could see the change and really see what we went and embrace what you were telling. And then the linkage between the people and the readers, and actually what we care about, air quality, health, and well-being, was created. And the stakeholders could understand this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Moses. So now is the chance for our participants. We have collected your questions, grouped them in the cases where they are similar or related, and we will pose these questions to the presenters. But I would like to remind or inform all the people who have asked questions, in case your question is not asked here, it's only because we don't have so much time, but we will have a written response to all the questions on the blog, the address which you will receive in a follow-up email. So since Moses is here and he just finished, I have a question for you, Moses, on how did you get the utility companies to agree with the city to work at the same time on the project? Please, a short and precise answer would be great.
Yeah, one, because we had the support of the governor, he was able to call the managing director of the power company. That one, we sat down, we went to the site, we told them what we want, and they agreed to do it. Actually, they usually do it on cost, but on that one, they did it at no cost for us. That was because of the goodwill of the governor and the MD. For the water company is owned by the Nairobi County government. So that one, at least the governor was able to give a directive that all those water pipes should be located to a better place. The other ones were mostly the service providers, the internet cables, and most of the internet cables. The county also owns the land where they are put. So if they are cut, they lose business. So we just give them like 1 week, tell them, we are working on this street. Please relocate these cables from your place to the other place. Otherwise, after 1 week, if they are cut, you don't hold us responsible. And two, we are not going to charge levies for excavation on the street, because they usually pay some fees if they want to do excavation on the street. So we didn't charge them for that. So with that, we were able to.
So it's a mix of incentives and also topics that or aspects that would benefit for
Yes.
the utility companies too.
Yes.
That's actually clever. So the next question I have is for Rosa, but I think Moses could also answer it, but then we'll get your response in writing, Moses. But I would like to pose this to Rosa. The question is, if businesses presented the highest resistance, what is your local champion's secret to get those who are initially against the proposal on board?
Yes, we had some resistance. There was a big supermarket in the area, and that was the one that had more resistance. And the resistance was due to loading and unloading for goods in front of the supermarket. So the negotiation which was reached with them is that in that area, even though like the only exception for them to park there will be the trucks when they come to load and unload. So that's the negotiation we reached with them, but they were the only ones that actually saw it as a threat but because of a very practical thing. But the other business owners and stuff actually saw it as an opportunity because there were a lot of activities happening in that area, more people around, and so on. I don't know if I answer your question. So in practical terms, I would say that like to talk with them before the intervention and tell them what is it going to be, and then if they have any concerns, any particular concerns about how it will affect them, rather than this perception that it will reduce the number of customers, then try to find a solution bilaterally.
Yeah, so making them more aware of the impacts of the action and how it could also benefit them.
Exactly.
Maybe I add something. In my case in Nairobi, the first time we did our tactical urbanism, we had assistance from the business people and the public transport operators. But within the first day, the business people had realized the change. First, in the air quality, noise pollution, and there was an increase in customers. And from there, we gained their support. The only people that remained with some resistance is the operators, because the way they operate is that they come with their vehicles to the CBD, they stay within one area until they are full. That is when they leave the CBD. So it causes a lot of the congestion, and they don't put them on. They are always on idle mode, so there's a lot of fumes. So once the business people realize some benefits within the first day, they embraced it. But the matatus, we had to use the political goodwill somehow to ensure that the project goes on. Again, we also had mapped out our stakeholders, and our biggest stakeholders were the shop owners, then the shoppers. The matatus, because we could relocate them to another place, were our stakeholders number 3. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I mean, we have more questions, and there are still questions coming in, but I think in the interest of time, I'm very sorry to stop this here. So that is more or less the conclusions that we could make from what we have heard today. It all depends upon, as we have expected, the political will, which is crucial, but then at the same time involving the right stakeholders, capacitating them with information and increasing their awareness on how such a strategy or an action would impact their lives. And how it can make it their daily quality of life better in public spaces. And also road safety can be a very important lever, as we have seen in the experiences from cities. And that could be also a reason for closing off streets for motor vehicles or reducing speeds. And we need to think long term, and we need to have a long-term strategy, even if we are planning for a very short-term intervention. So I hope I tried to summarize most of the comments from the presenters, but you are free to contact us. And if the topic is still of interest, or if it's of interest for you, then there are these 2 fact sheets that we have developed as a part of the Urban Pathways project, and you can also download these fact sheets from the handouts panel of your go-to webinar control, or you can also visit the link that you will see on the chat box, and there you can download a lot of resources. And in addition to that, in the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned to you that there is an upcoming webinar on air quality sensing, the part 2 of it, and the link is on the screen, and it will also appear on your chat box. So there you can register. It's coordinated by my colleague Maria Rosa, who was also presenting here. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us or the presenters directly. Their email addresses and their contact information is on the screen and also on the chat box. And thank you once again for taking the time, staying with us, and sharing your wonderful experiences and comments. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter if you're on Twitter, and please take time to visit our website. And I also want to thank my colleague Shritu for making these chat messages appear whenever at the right times, and she's the magician behind all the charts and polls. So thank you everyone.